In a new Houthi crime, missiles kill and injure more than 35 civilians in Ma'rib. Most of them are children. Houthi rebels continue bombarding civilian areas in Hodeidah. European Union Foreign Affairs Chief discusses Yemeni crisis with the UN envoy Hans Grunberg. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaz Abdelbey. 2 children and a woman were killed and dozens were injured after Houthis targeted a residential area in Ma'rib. Local sources indicated that the Houthis launched 3 missiles on Al Rawda neighborhood, killing 2 children and a woman in addition to a destruction of 12 houses. 8 cars were also destroyed due to the Houthi rockets, and the search is ongoing for victims under the rebels, while the numbers of victims could rise. With the ongoing Houthi offensive on Ma'rib, new waves of displacement headed to the city. Yet the United Nations has described the situation inside those camps as alarming. More on the story is within this report.
Displaced people in Ma'rib keep suffering due to the overcrowding in camps. According to data from the United Nations Office for Humanitarian Affairs and the International Organization for Migration, overcrowding in IDP sites poses a safety risk. More than 17 fires were reported in the displacement sites, especially in the city of Ma'rib and Ma'rib al-Wadi. This is attributed to overcrowding in displacement sites, insufficient equipment, and the different ways people adapt to the situation, such as using wood for cooking in densely populated places or batteries to generate electricity. These data show that between January and July 2021, more than 52% of the displaced in Ma'rib moved within the district, with the escalation of attacks and shelling on the city of Ma'rib, which led to more civilian casualties. More than 110 people were injured and killed between April and June, the highest number recorded in the governorate since 2018, according to the International Organization for Migration. The data of UN organization shows that the proximity of some camps to the front lines exposes them to multiple displacement and increases their levels of vulnerability. While the number of times families moved during the conflict is undetermined, and the resettlement process is depleting the family's resources, as people are moving in Ma'rib now to safer places, raising concerns about the limited resources available to families, the cost of displacement, and increased vulnerability as people end up staying close to conflict zones. Reports indicate that tensions are rising between the displaced and their host communities. About 774 IDPs fled from Al Rakaza area in Ma'rib al-Wadi to Al Jaba area due to threatening messages from tribal groups. There were also reports that community members obstructed the establishment of water networks that provide water to the displaced and migrants. This reflects the increased risks and the experience of social tension and highlights the pressure on the individual, family, and community resources. Humanitarian reports cautioned that the commitment to societal cohesion was a critical adaptation mechanism for Yemenis before the conflict, in light of the weakness of state institutions and deteriorating services, and this held the individuals through family, kinship, tribal, geographical, or other ties. And this interdependence led to the sharing of financial support and shelter, fuel, food, water, and companionship. But the conflict witnessed an increase in the effects associated with needs and resource constraints. The report stated that the lack of resources and the increase in needs led to a change in the ability of Yemenis to share resources, which affected social networks and seemed much narrower and more selective. Whereas IDPs were once seen as worthy guests, today they are seen as a threat to available resources. This is likely to be the situation across Yemen, but Ma'rib is particularly affected because it was the Mecca for displaced people and is now a hotspot for conflict.
The joint forces thwarted an infiltration attempt by the Houthi militia in Al Tuhaita district south of Hodeidah. Military sources said Houthi armed groups were spotted while they were trying to infiltrate the lines of contact. The sources indicated that the Houthis were inflicted with losses in lives and equipment after the clashes with the joint forces. Still in Hodeidah, where Houthi militia renewed shelling with artillery the Thabit brothers factory. Local sources said the shelling caused considerable damage inside the factory. A few days ago, Thabit's complex was targeted with a previous Houthi attack. The Houthi militia admitted the killing of 36 of its military commanders in different war fronts. The militia, through its media, showed the funerals of those dead. The rebels have received heavy losses in Al Jawf, Ma'rib, Al Dala, and the West Coast. On the political front, the European Union's foreign policy official Josep Borrell met with UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg. The two sides discussed the situation in Yemen. The EU chief official expressed full support to the UN envoy's mission to end the conflict in the country. There has been a massive regional and international welcome to the return of the Yemeni government to Aden. This comes amid major economic and security challenges and a wave of public anger due to high prices. More on the story is within this report.
The international and regional welcome for the return of the Yemeni government to Aden reflects the world's commitment to make peace efforts succeed and put an end to the suffering of millions of Yemenis. It is a clear support for the efforts made to implement the Riyadh Agreement. In a joint statement issued by the US Embassy in Yemen, on behalf of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the United States, they all welcomed the return of the Prime Minister to Aden and stressed the need for economic reforms and that all parties should work together to implement the Riyadh Agreement. Similarly, the US envoy to Yemen, Tim Linderking, stressed that it is time to work together and end the suffering of the Yemeni people. This comes in line with intensive diplomatic activity of the United Nations envoy in the region to push for ending the war. The subsequent moves of the American government reflects the aspirations of the international community that the government return is a step towards restoring the government and resumption of the political track that has been suspended for years. Those concerned with the Yemeni crisis believe that the international welcome of the government shows how far the international community is committed to end the conflict in the country. The government, however, faces challenges mainly in terms of economy. Large protests against the deterioration of the economic situation extended from Aden and Hadramaut to Abyan and all the way to Ta'az. But the international community support will be linked to the extent of the ability to overhaul the government ranks and overcome the differences that affected the course of the battle with the Houthi militia. Further, the confrontations that took place in Aden a day after the return of the government to the city, which left 6 dead and about 61 wounded, added to the problems of the government. According to observers, involved parties must speed up the implementation of the Riyadh Agreement and work to address the security and living conditions in liberated areas as an important step in any endeavor to achieve peace. Despite the commitment shown by the international community and Yemeni allies to us to stop the war and reach a political compromise, without the internal players' good intention to do it, all those efforts will go with the wind.
2 children were killed and a third wounded in a mine explosion in Al Baida. Local sources indicated that the children are from one family. According to sources, the Houthi militia planted 2.5 million mines, killing more than 20,000 civilians. In the same line, Massam Project announced that more than 1,500 mines were removed during the last week of last September. The total mines that has been cleared since the start of the Massam Project reached nearly 280,000 throughout Yemen. Coming next, amid war, the suffering of displaced people continues nationwide.
أقول لك راحت بالغداء لأهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بالأهلها في المزرعة، والمزرعة ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعة وانفجر فيها اللغم، دعست على اللغم وانفجر فيهم. الحمار انتهى الماء ترى تبقعت رجليها كامل. نغير منها نغير الشبعلة اللي هي البيت سابها من دور رجليها، صافناها طبية أقرب طبية وصافناها لا هي بطلت رجليها كامل.
التزود هلي قابل لي لعام وطبعت تحت الزوايا.
Welcome back. Displaced families' suffering has aggravated. This has complicated their life, and some of them cannot secure food and basic needs in order just to survive. More on the story is within this report.
Rahma is a blind woman who didn't survive the scourge of the war waged by the Houthi militia on different areas in Hodeidah governorate for years. The fires of war forced her to leave her house in her original home in Hodeidah with members of her family consisting of her sick husband, her widowed daughter, and her orphaned grandchildren, to send her fates towards a heart-suffering journey and homelessness and a miserable life with all its pain and details.
We were displaced from Hodeidah to Aden and arrived here in Shabwa, and we have nothing to possess and fled because of the war. We are homeless, and those who take care of us are the children. We sleep on the streets, we don't have a family. We suffer from the sun, and they don't give us anything. They asked us to register our data to help us. We registered several times and did not receive anything.
Rahma and her family landed to live between four walls in a narrow-minded random room that lacks the most basic standards of housing, as the suffering didn't stop at poor shelter, but rather the lack of food and medicine, which made this family live most days in conflict with hunger and suffering at a time when societies and humanitarian organizations pay no attention to them.
Now we settled in Shabwa. We were displaced more than once because of the war. Here in Shabwa we rent a one-room house and we have nothing, neither food nor money. My mother is blind and my father cannot bear the burden alone. I move firewood and water over my head and there is no one to give us aid. We registered more than once and did not receive anything.
The tragic conditions that Rahma and her family are going through are nothing but a part of the story that describes the suffering of thousands of displaced families who have been displaced by the war and are now suffering strongly as a result of deprivation and marginalization. They are unable to obtain their minimum basic needs and haven't received a share of the financial, food and shelter assistance provided by the United Nations organizations.
Because of the war in Taz, I lost 2 of my children. I was alone and ran away and came here. I ran away from Taz. I have no one. There is no one to help me or giving me money. I go down to the street to ask for help and beg.
International aid, how big it is, can never be enough, and not every single family can have easy access to it. Thus, nothing can end suffering of this family and the entire Yemen but a stop of this ugly war.
The World Bank disclosed the emergence of famine-like points in areas under the Houthi militia control. Those famine-like can be traced in Hajjah, Amran, and Al Jawf. 80% of the population is facing significant challenges in accessing food, drinking water, and healthcare services. It's estimated that about 100,000 people died due to the fighting and 130,000 due to the lack of food and limited access to healthcare. The Houthi militia collected about 2 billion riyals in 8 months out of donations in Hajjah. The militia used these revenues to support fighters on the fronts. Shaheen is the name of the storm that hit parts of the Arab Gulf countries. The storm increased into a first-degree cyclone that is accompanied by heavy rains, and authorities in different Arab countries are prepared to face the landfall. More on the story is within this report.
With a wind speed that reaches up 115 kilometers per hour, the cyclone Shaheen made landfall on Oman, coming from the Arab Gulf. Expectations said that Shaheen is a storm on a scale of 4 other stronger degrees. The 5-category storm is 215 km per hour. The Omani authorities took precautions before the advent of the storm. The Omani National Committee for Emergency Management urged the relocation of residents in the northern towns and in the coastal areas, including borders of the capital Muscat, to avoid the hazards of Shaheen. People in Oman were advised to remain extremely cautious and to avoid going out unless extremely necessary. Shaheen was expected to be accompanied by high-speed wind and very heavy thunderstorms across much of the northern parts of Oman and some coastal areas, according to the Civil Aviation Authority. Once Shaheen hits the land, it will decrease into a tropical depression. Omani news agency said that the armed forces affirmed their full readiness to deal with the cyclone. They said that they will provide all support to contribute in dealing with Shaheen by providing all support and assistance to the government agencies. Regulators in Oman warned that sea will get very rough until the storm begins to decrease in intensity, with waves height expected to reach between 8 and 12 meters. In the United Arab Emirates, the National Emergency Crisis urges the public not to visit beaches and valleys during the upcoming period. They warned that Shaheen is expected to bring heavy showers that will lead to the flow of valleys, and water will gather in some lowlands. The wind will be active and will cause dust, reducing horizontal visibility. The United Arab Emirates regulators warned as well that lightning and thunder could happen. As to Yemen, Shaheen may affect the far eastern sides according to meteorological graphs. The country was hit lately with a wave of bad weather that hit a number of areas in Yemen, causing death and damage.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 28 new cases of the COVID-19 in 5 governorates. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 9,139, including 1,734 deaths and 5,659 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. In a new Houthi crime, missiles kill and injure more than 35 civilians in Marib. Most of them are children. Houthi rebels continue bombarding civilian areas in Hodeidah. European Union Foreign Affairs Chief discusses Yemeni crisis with the UN envoy Hans Grunberg. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.